All right, everybody that's joining us, thanks for joining the Creative Finance Collective. I'm Andy Fowler, and I'm bringing on a couple of folks joining us here today. We've got Scott Horne, Sean St. Clair, and Natalia Ulek-Rice. Natalia, how are you?
Hi, everybody. Forgive my gear, but I will be heading to the gym after.
No, yeah,
Lucky.
no, lucky. Uh, the afternoon workout always sounds like a great idea until the afternoon comes, and you're like, oh, I should have just gotten up early, but it was too hard to get up early.
It is too hard to get up early. There are those that either get up early or do it religiously, and then there's everybody else like us.
I guess I'm that nerd who gets up really early, but I can't work up really early. I have to work out in the afternoon.
So,
Yeah.
Natalia, where are you out of, kiddo?
I am out of Tampa, Florida, and thank you for
Really?
calling me kiddo. I'm almost 40. That feels awesome.
Oh, you old woman. You're just making us all feel like old men.
Well,
Only Andy and Sean, they're the dirty old men. I'm not. But
for some of us, it actually is the case. For some of us, we are old men. If you're just now joining us, this is the Creative Finance Collective, and what we're doing is talking about all things creative finance, and what we're really looking for are questions that you might have, because that's what we're here for, to talk about creative finance and to talk and answer questions about that or real estate generally. We've already got some questions, so maybe it'll be a lively episode. By the way, we're going to take questions as long as we get them, and or until we're tired of each other. So if you want us to stay on and for the hour, give us the questions. I wanted to make note, Scott, I know you were teaching a class, and Sean, you were working. Natalia, you were probably working too. But
Mhm.
I thought it was interesting as a talking point tonight that the market really took a dump this today. Had its worst day since March of 2023, so last year, all because of new inflation numbers. The reason I bring that up is, Scott, I think it was you maybe last week talking about, in some respects, some of the stuff slowing down. I don't remember if it was you or somebody else, but inflation is still here. It hasn't gone away. And from a creative finance perspective, I can't think of a better setup to suggest that investors that are interested in that space aren't going anywhere anytime soon. I don't think. I don't. It doesn't appear like the inflation problem is 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 gone. And if it's not gone, then you don't have a Fed that's likely wanting to necessarily reverse course on interest rates, so on and so forth. And on top of that, I think lending just jumped back into the average of a 7% range. So I'm curious, have you seen, what's been your experience? I'll start with you, Scott. Have you seen any further slowdown or anything else in this, or are investors still as aggressively interested as they have been?
well, the first thing is I've been seeing the slowdown on the sales of property. Things that were just hot as fire. Things are slowly getting back to normal, as I kind of call it. But on our seller finance transactions that we own and sell, what used to be a 30, 45-day sale close is now pushing 90 to 120 days. And that seems to be across the board. It doesn't mean you might run into that anomaly where something moves out a bit faster, but I see that portion of the business. I think when you look back historically, though, on the industry, going back as far as to the mid 1980s, I'm not that old, by the way, Natalia, but when we got started in the business, this business has always been there. It will never go away, I don't think. There's always a need for financing, and people always need a place to live, and they don't necessarily need a place to work. And yeah, you may have to adjust your numbers and those kind of things, but it's always going to be there. Now, when inflation is hitting and rates are still maintaining where they are, you know, banks are wanting to charge prime one plus. They don't have to, but that's what they're charging out there, it seems like. And that makes it very difficult for the investor to acquire homes from a standpoint of using cash or institutional lending of some type. On the flip side, buying creatively, whatever that might be, subject to a wrap or a direct seller finance, is the answer to that scenario. And it's just recognizing that that's going to be there when you can take advantage of these low rates that are out there. And I think that's going to be out for many, many, many years to come. Inflation or not, it's just you've got to build into the equation your back end hold times and marketing issues to make the deals work.
Yeah, a few numbers behind the numbers just to illustrate this, I thought were interesting, but there's the reported inflation number, but some of the things behind this relating to real estate anyway, rent inflation, they're reporting is at 6.1%. They had homeowner inflation at 6.2%, and then like things like car insurance inflation were upwards of 20%. People are basically getting killed on their renewals with auto insurance, but it doesn't look like the Fed's reversing course just yet, and much to I think a lot of borrowers' chagrin, it doesn't look like we're going to be seeing really cheap financing, conventional financing anyway, anytime soon.
No. And at 3.8% of the average American's household income for car insurance, that's pricey. Y'all going to start walking more?
We probably should. As a culture, we probably should.
Well, just considering how many fat people are in America, you're right.
Yeah. So why don't we go to we have some questions already, and we can move into those. By the way, as we get into those, make sure to post your questions as you're going. We'll take them as long as we get them. So our first question is, what's the most common case of fraud you guys see in subto deals? What do you guys think? Well, maybe we should start with this. Have you seen cases of fraud in subto deals?
I would say that I have seen not fraud per se, like not outright misrepresentation, but certainly something unexpected for the subto purchaser. And this is the prevalence of individuals after they do their subto deal, they've sold the home to the investor, and then the investor about a couple months later discovers that there's been a bankruptcy filing. And that brings everything to a halt in respect to the property.
Okay.
So sellers engaging in bankruptcy filings, despite them trying to, make the payments and everything under the subto agreement.
I think what I see, Andy, is it's where I've run into within the last 6 months, several occasions where the investor, because for whatever reason, their borrower, their tenants not paying them, they're not paying the underlying debt to the property. I've seen that being more prevalent. I've seen investors who want to buy properties into land trusts will do it. They'll assign the beneficial interest out to a third party who may reassign it again. And of course, no one ever notifies the original seller who is actually making the payments. So the seller's out there in the dark. And the scary part is if the seller doesn't have recourse, i.e. a deed of trust, even a vendor's lien in their deed, in the event of a default, they're stuck. I was contacted not long ago by a lady over in the Fort Worth area who had that very same scenario ongoing, and now she was in active foreclosure. And when we checked out all the documents, it's like, honey, you're screwed. The only thing we could do is file a lawsuit in order to foreclose on the property. It's going to take 4 to 6 months minimum, probably, to get a judgment in order to gain ownership of the property. But by then the property is gone and it's self-defeating. So you see some things like that out there. I'd have to think for a minute about legit active fraud, but it's there. Um, I've got one idea in mind. I'm trying to get it brought to my mind what it is, but I'll bring it up later when I remember it. But you want the investors, if they're going to play in this sphere, by gosh, do the right thing, take care of stuff. If you're going to have, you can't rely upon the back end buyer or the back end tenant to always have the money there to pay your mortgage. And just because it's in someone else's name doesn't mean you shouldn't maintain that obligation at least.
So one thing that you have to watch out for that's active fraud, and happens, is the whole idea of a straw buyer, where basically, an individual purchases the property and within a week or two, they have it under contract to sell it subto. And that just smells of fraud. I mean, where you had somebody who, entered into the loan documents, signed the loan documents with full intention of breaching those documents.
It's like a wholesaler
And
subto. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sean, if you
And
can
so,
hear us.
you think about it, you go to the seller and say, can you guys hear me?
Well, Andy, that's what happens if you're up in Michigan in the middle of snowstorms and ice storms. It knocks out your reception.
It's not Michigan, it's Wisconsin anyway.
Oh, Wisconsin. Same thing, only different.
Wisconsin. No, we're on the other side of the lake.
Almost Canada. I was talking about this in this little seminar I was doing today here, and it's about investors, and this is the fraud part, and investors don't think about it, but you see these guys, and they're still out doing this, where they will go to a seller who has a lot of equity, suggest that they refinance the house. Now, you don't see this as much right now with the rates being at 6.5%, 7%. But when they were back at 3.5%, 4%, pull money out of the deal through a cash out refi with the full intent to then sell the property subject to the existing debt. Because, of course, the refi is meant to be to refinance the home where you're going to live in it, not to pull cash out with the intent to sell it. And that does create a fraudulent scenario, and that is mortgage fraud, basically. And then, of course, the other thing you see investors do is with sellers who are in arrears is go in, help them do loan modifications with the full intent to buy the house subject to. And of course, the loan mod is there to help the seller stay in the home, not sell it, allowing the investor to take advantage of those kind of items. And so what you want to do is just, if they're going to play in those arenas, be very, very cautious not to cross that gray line.
Yeah, and I would say, in terms of like understanding fraud, right? Maybe a little bit of a definition of fraud, right? There's got to be a known falsehood, right? So if something happens after the fact and you had no idea what was involved, you don't really have the requisite mindset for fraud per se. But it is that known falsehood that is to induce action on behalf of the other party to the detriment of that other party, and it's got to be material, right? It's got to be going to the actual meat of whatever the agreement is, and what makes it a valuable exchange.
Yeah, and I think, Natalia, I think you got at this just a little bit ago, but I think what more often we might see is what's tantamount to like negligent misrepresentation, where there's a misrepresentation made, and people, rightfully might have relied on the information that they were given, which was incomplete or for whatever reason, and have been injured as a result of it. So, I think there's a lot that fall in that bucket that weren't like some malicious, evil attempt to lie, although that there can be that. I think more oftentimes it's, an act of negligence or overlooking things, which, then beg the question too, how good are the forms you're using? What kind of disclosures are you using? Even more of a reason why you want to make sure to paper a transaction that's otherwise, not a standard conventional transaction. If you're just now joining us, this is the Creative Finance Collective. We're taking questions throughout the hour on all things creative finance. Make sure to post them. We'll take questions for as long as you have them. Also note there's a barcode at the top of the screen. So if you're watching on a platform that is not YouTube, that takes you to our YouTube channel, which is the kind of the easiest place to follow this kind of content. So go there, subscribe. Alan, I saw that you popped on. How you doing?
Doing well, doing well. How are you?
Doing all right. So, hey, we were just talking about instances of fraud we've seen in creative finance. In your practice, have you been seeing any increased instances of fraud or any instances of fraud related to the creative finance transaction?
Not in the creative finance arena. Now we have seen some of the title theft stuff going on, but not much fraud in the creative finance arena for us.
Okay. All right. We got another question here. So what kind of liens do I have to pay right away, and what kind do I get more time to pay off?
Well, is that question for a cash transaction with a lender involved, or is it for a creative finance transaction?
Well, let's assume, since it's I don't know, but given that this is the Creative Finance Collective, we'll make the rules and we'll say that they're asking about a creative finance transaction. What do you think?
Well, I know the answers. Who else wants to volunteer?
First, you got to see if it is actually a lien on the property, right? Too many people jump to the conclusion that it's a lien. I had a client meeting earlier, and he had gotten a title commitment from a title company. And I'm like, hey, these two things, they're not liens because this property is homestead. Well, here in the state of Florida, these kinds of creditors, judgments that are not related to building on the property or a mortgage on the property or the homeowners associations, they don't attach to homestead. So they're not liens on it. So I'm like, so you can go and tell, the title company, those are not part of the requirements to satisfy those. So you got to check first. Is it an actual lien on that particular piece of property?
Good point. Yeah, you could even have instances where it was a valid lien, but it's expired, and is no longer constitutes a valid lien, depending on whether it's a judgment or maybe a tax lien or something to that effect. I know here mechanics liens only last. They've kind of got a short window of time, so there's a lot on the front end you want to look at before you even start to pay that off, at least from the proceeds of the sale of the property. Scott, what were you going to add?
That's the fun part of this business, though. And maybe that's a little masochistic in a sense, being that way. But learning how liens work, learning how to navigate liens, learning what happens in real life or doesn't happen. And it's kind of interesting when buying homes from that perspective, because when you buy a home, at least creatively, buyer beware. You don't have to pay off any of the liens at all if you're the buyer. You just want to make sure you know what's out there and then navigate them appropriately. I could take up the next, hour giving examples of all of that. One that I always use in my seminars and whatnot is a house that we bought not long ago, where my litigation attorney had filed suit against a homeowner because he had a roof put on two of his houses, didn't pay anybody, and runs out and files bankruptcy immediately. And of course, when you file bankruptcy, as we lawyers know, you've got to turn around and file your financials and all that stuff with the court and take care of that. So he calls up and goes, here, look over all this, do the homework for me. What's going on? So we find a homestead. And one day I will let Natalia tell us how Florida works from a legal perspective, so I can understand that a little bit better. But Texas is fairly similar, because we only have three kind of liens that can actually attach to a homestead in Texas, which is a purchase money mortgage, or a mortgage of any type, or a property tax lien or IRS lien, and then a properly executed mechanics lien contract as well. Now, title companies want other things removed, but those are business decisions, not legal decisions. So when you understand that, when you're looking at buying these houses, you make calls. So in this one scenario, there was also a rent property that was about a 300,000 plus home that needed a lot of work done to it. So I did my homework, did our title checks, and the first thing we find out there is a property tax lien, which I know in Arizona, at least here in Texas, it attaches priority over everything. Then we found a 8-year-old judgment lien on the property. So of course, knowing that judgment liens in Texas have a 10-year life, unless they're renewed and extended, which doesn't happen often. Then we found a $105,000 IRS lien on the property as well. And as we all know, IRS liens have a life of 10 years. And the question becomes, would the IRS ever come after the property, or do they renew and extend? Which I just don't see. And so my guy went ahead, we filed the judgment. We actually executed the judgment, foreclosed, and we bought the judgment for a big discount. And this is a home that needed $80,000 of renovation to get to value. So you add all that up, there was a lot of, just liens on the property. But we went out and did a lot of funky things. I did a tax loan from myself to myself, knowing how to play that game. So I was able to pay off that first lien tax loan and jump into that first lien position to protect some dollars. And then we just navigated the liens from there, because in my experience, at least in Texas, you don't see judgment creditors foreclosing and executing on their judgment liens very often. And after 8 years, you don't go kick a sleeping dog, right? If it was a year old, yeah, you do. But 8 years down the line, no. And the IRS is the IRS. It's the government. Good luck with that. And of course, eventually, all of these liens fell off, and it wound up being a great deal. The issue out there is for investors who listen to this program is not everybody is that risk averse. A lot of people have various issues with risk. They want to minimize that in some regard. Other guys might, like me, we just throw caution to the wind, jump out there and go. But it's, done from a knowledge perspective of what you reasonably expect and anticipate to happen.
Well, I think to your and Natalia's point, the a good understanding of liens within your respective state or the state that you're doing business in could be an invaluable, area of knowledge as an investor, because, otherwise you just see, what's on a title report and you're like, okay, I can run these numbers and now it just doesn't make sense. But, if you know how the liens work or how they can be negotiated or what's valid and what's not valid, you can, I think it's probably easier to assess the risk that you're facing and maybe be able to jump into a lot more deals that otherwise scare a lot more folks.
So the jump on what Scott was saying, and first off, I'm trying to figure out where Scott's located right now. It seems graphically familiar.
Yeah, yes, he's within like throwing distance. Yes.
Come join us, Alan.
I will. So same type of deal on the mechanics lien. A lot of times, we know that mechanics lien is coming up to its statute of limitations, and the buyer and seller doesn't usually work when there's a lender involved. But buyer and seller say, "All right, yeah, we'll agree to this," and just go ahead and let the sale occur. Move that mechanics lien over to Schedule B, and then hope that they never come back. And they usually don't. And then highlighting again what Scott was saying, every single lien can be moved over to Schedule B as long as the parties agree. So if it's a fix and flip and you want to hold off on paying an HOA lien or pay this lien or that lien, then move it over to Schedule B. Wait until you're getting money in and you're not coming out of pocket to pay that lien. So all types of magic can be done with those liens and Schedule B for the creative finance stuff.
No, it can. And, Alan, if you're getting title insurance, that's one thought process we have to go through. But if you're not getting title insurance, you're just doing an abstract. That's a different, thought process also. And of course, it's a lot easier without title insurance that's out there.
Yeah, I'd call that weapons free.
Absolutely.
All right. If you're just now joining us, this is the Creative Finance Collective. We're talking about all things creative finance. So if you have questions, make sure to leave them in the chat. We've got another question. Are you seeing an influx in sellers having to foreclose on the wrap because the buyer isn't paying? So the deal got done and buyer's just not paying the loan that they took subject to.
I'm
Well,
not necessarily, I'm not seeing more. It occurs, but not seeing a higher incidence of it yet.
no, and Al and I agree, at least in our Texas marketplace, and we do
Yeah.
foreclosures in the four primary cities across Texas primarily. And you see them. And what's interesting is you see the foreclosures, but I also see either a lot of cure scenarios or I see that they sell the property. And so where I might wind up having four foreclosures, let's say in the Houston marketplace down there. So I'm getting everything ready to go, take care of all this at one time and actually go down myself to handle those things. All of a sudden, three of them pay off in some format or are brought current during the cure period, or even after the cure period during the acceleration phase. And the lender decides to go ahead and accept the funds and move on. Maybe you're kicking the can down the road a little bit, but I haven't seen a increase per se, not yet at least. I'm not seeing a lot of that. But I will say with the inflation that we were talking about at the outset of the program and issues, which means home building slows down substantially in the marketplace. And so a lot of the creative finance world deals in the Hispanic marketplace out there. I'm assuming, Natalia, that's true also in the Florida marketplace.
It's actually a good mix here,
Really?
surprisingly. Mhm.
But my concern for Texas, at least, is, and I don't know if Arizona falls into that mindset, is if home building is waning substantially, and all of a sudden all of these construction crews and laborers are being, laid off or out of work for some reason, how is that going to affect that particular marketplace? I haven't seen a cause and effect yet, but I keep thinking about it.
Mm.
Well, I'll add a bit to that in terms of like the Florida market. One, because the prices of homes has not stopped growing here. Like even at the end of last year, it was 14% over the prior year here in the Tampa Bay area. Foreclosure proceedings are just not leading to a foreclosure sale in the mechanism in the way that they were before. A lot more counsel for these foreclosure banks are allowing an extension of time for there to be traditional sales, so long as the mortgage is paid off. They prefer that route, which didn't used to be the case 10, 12 years ago. But I haven't seen an increase of buyers defaulting on these transactions.
Yeah, I don't. From my perspective, I haven't seen any sort of increase. Sean, what about you? Have you? I think your experience is probably the same, but I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, we haven't seen an increase on our end. I mean, there's a few out there, and but nothing of real significance. So no real uptick.
All right, we have another question. Should I leave the seller's homeowner's insurance in place in a sub-2 transaction?
No,
Alan, I know you like insurance questions.
no. Next question.
No.
No, we used to do that. So I just had a event today, a 1 hour wrap event, and I was talking about old school. Old school, we used to well, heck, we used to just have a deed to secure assumption, and then that grew up, and then we used to say buyer gets their own insurance, seller leaves theirs in place. And it was considered a cost of doing business, and then we finally figured out, well, we can actually have the seller cancel theirs. Buyer gets new insurance, and you got yourself an insurance agent who knows how to get these things in place correctly. And then there may be a shift, this year occurring. We're seeing more problems with things, and so, like I said a couple times ago, we're going back to the land trust to make sure there's no issue in getting this insurance in place, because that trust will be the insured, and under the Garn St. Germain, you're protected somewhat, but definitely aren't leaving the seller's insurance in place because it's ineffective. You can't insure something that you don't own.
So let me kind of jump in a little bit too, Alan. And again, I agree with you with most of those scenarios. Can you leave a seller's insurance in place? And I think the answer is maybe, subject to the fact, can the new buyer be added on as a co-insured or additional insured, which is problematic along the way. If you want to run the risk of not having coverage and being added as let's say a party of interest, if you're going to do a back-end wraparound mortgage, maybe. So if you buy it subject to, you're going to sell it for wraparound, you're going to sell it in 30, 60 days where that back-end buyer gets new insurance. Do you want to change the insurance in and out a lot of times, which could potentially raise a red flag with the mortgage company? On the other hand, if you're going to hold this property as a rental property or a fix and flip or even live in the property, that's when it's on automatic, get new insurance. And just, again, as Alan said, have it set up properly in that scenario along the way. So I think it depends on a few things, but insurance is one of those things that you better understand that business pretty well and do it the right way. If not, it gets kicked out, and all of a sudden those red flags, kind of like, have any of y'all ever been to Pancho's Mexican food?
No. Sounds like Alan has.
It's a place it's in Texas. Has a little flag, it's all you can eat. And let's just say it isn't the best quality of all things. And they were at one time, I thought, shut down years ago for serving kangaroo meat or something like that. I mean, this was a long time ago, guys. But let's raise that little flag. So we don't want to raise those little flags with the with the mortgage companies if we can find a way to avoid it.
Did you get the sopapillas at the end of the meal?
Well, that was the best part of everything because they couldn't do anything weird with those, You always wonder if the cheese enchiladas were Velveeta cheese or something else. It's just like, So, sorry to bring that up. Sidebar.
For Florida, though, I mean, if you're thinking of doing subject to transactions, you really do want to take into consideration the fact that the person that you're thinking of acquiring the property from might be grandfathered into an old policy, and the transfer of title might trigger, new everything. And our insurance rates have skyrocketed. So some people that potentially were grandfathered under the policy because the roof, etc. Now the transfer of title triggers that new condition, might trigger a re-roof unless you want to pay an exorbitant rate for insurance purposes. So you really need to calculate the cost of insurance amortized and see if you're going to be able to pay on that acquisition.
Well, if you guys would stop having hurricanes down there, it wouldn't be so high.
Yeah, it's high. It's high. I haven't met a single person who in the past year hasn't faced a policy raise of at least 50%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right. If you're just now joining us, this is the Creative Finance Collective. We're talking about all things creative finance. So if you have a question, post it in the chat. We'll get to it. Also, if you're watching on a platform that is not YouTube, we have a barcode at the top of the screen that allows you to scan that and take you to our YouTube page, which is kind of the easiest platform or place to watch this content. Let's go to some more questions. Is there any circumstances you guys had to use title insurance on subto deals?
Well, we want to use title insurance.
Yeah.
But, again, in Texas, it really comes down to that risk scenario for the borrower. If the existing debt in the property is an FHA, VA, or home equity, the rule of thumb is title insurance isn't available. That's number one. And I think you need to know those kind of things so you don't improperly sign a contract with a buyer saying that you're going to provide them title insurance or it's available in some format, and all of a sudden it's not, because could you be in breach of contract in that scenario? But a lot of investors want title insurance. I know for us title guys, we like to give it to them. But, in Texas, at least, when there's only 3 kind of liens can attach to a homestead, if you know how to navigate liens properly, you don't necessarily have to go ahead and get title insurance. I think it depends on what your short and long term, uses of title is going to be. If it's going to be a long term rental for you, getting title insurance might be a smart thing to do. If it's going to be a fix and flip, or if it's going to be an owner finance on the back end, a wrap of some type, maybe not. Alan,
Are they talking about filing claims or purchasing the insurance?
I don't know. Is there any circumstances you guys had to use title insurance on a sub-2 deal? So,
I'll answer the other side of this thing. We'll answer both sides.
all right.
I don't keep track of what type of file have had title insurance claims, but big problem area is utilization of an affidavit of heirship instead of a deceased party going through probate or administration. And those AOHs are a common source of problems. Closed one in Harris County, and the two sole heirs, the two brothers, forgot they had two other brothers in Florida, and that was a claim. We had
it was Natalie's fault, by the way.
It was. He was out of her town. Then had a
No way. I don't do closings. Not anymore.
Had a wife sign an AOH, and she forgot that her husband had a daughter from a different marriage. Things like that. And I don't remember if those were sub-2s or not, to tell you the truth. But I don't see any more or less exposure, whether it's sub-2 or a conventional transaction, that would cause a claim to arise. And I agree with Scott. I generally don't get title insurance on my sub-2 acquisition, but it depends on what the title commitment shows, title search shows. And then on the sell, usually getting it if the seller wants it. But again, subject to what that title search is showing.
I think, as you said, it's just a time and place for everything, right?
Yeah.
So what's out there? What does it look like? What are the risk issues? And if you know how to look at that the right way, make the call.
Bring it back down to, what you mentioned regarding the heirs. I would say that's one area where you do see fraud take place.
Oh yeah.
And oftentimes the investors don't know what's going on, right? So like they find a deal, find a property, approach who they think are the only heirs. The heirs do a probate proceeding, and sometimes signing disclaimers and joinders on behalf of people that had no idea that these proceedings were going on, or just simply not naming them. And then, they had their closing, passed on to another investor, And if you don't have the title insurance coverage to deal with these fraudulent filings and these probate proceedings, you're going to be out a significant sum of money.
Those damn lawyers are so expensive, aren't they?
Yeah, they ruin everything. That's a good. No, that was a good point. Let's go. We've got another question. What circumstances most commonly put the lender on notice of the sale? I think what this is asking is, in a sub-2 deal, what could I do wrong with the transaction to tip off the lender that I'm selling the property without paying them off, and thus causing them to want to trigger the due on sale clause?
So let me take the easy one, the insurance not being put in place. I'll get that one knocked out. And then let me take the second one also. The seller calling the lender and saying, "Hey, I didn't sell my property. What's going on?" That one tends to tip them off.
Explain while you're up, explain why, if you don't do the insurance right, that tips off the lender.
When you send the declaration page over for your insurance, they're looking to check a box. They want to check off, okay, our borrower is insured. If that borrower isn't seen on that deck page, then they're gonna refuse that insurance. And then if it's not corrected timely, they may go get forced place insurance and put that in place. When they're doing that, they usually do a title search. They find out there's been a transfer of title, and then they send out a due on sale notice. So the due on sale clause being called, in my experience, the most common reason is insurance not being put in place correctly.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree with that completely, Alan. But I also will tell you things I run into lately is, there's this new thing in the industry called TCs, right? And the transactional coordinators. I know they're all out there just trying to make money, do things. They're teaching these investors that you have to have a TC involved so you can go out and do the important things in life, whatever it might be, and let them do all the dirty work behind the scenes. And all of a sudden, you got all these hands involved in this deal. And these TCs are calling in, ordering a payoff on a sub-2. Why? Not a reinstatement, but a payoff. Or they're calling in using an authorization form or a power of attorney, wanting to get information and whatnot. And all the time they do that, this is getting logged in, logged in, logged in. And, just like with insurance, if it's not done right, boom, they kick it back out. But there are too many cooks in the kitchen sometimes, as I'm seeing. There's too many touches to the mortgage company. I like to tell the investors whenever possible, navigate through online portals through your computer systems. Go online, do it. Get the information you need to log in, change addresses, take care of things appropriately, and leave the insurance or the mortgage company alone. And just hands off if and when possible along the way. And so if you can do that, I think you minimize it. If you do your insurance right, as as Alan said, you can do it right as well. And of course, make your dadgum payments on time. Don't give them an issue or a reason to look into things.
Yep.
We've actually we're doing it differently now. Used to be we'd get the authorization, we would ask for the requisite information to allow us to close, copy the note, reinstatement, payoff, what have you. And now we've instructed all the investors to just get on a phone call with the borrower, get a temporary authorization, a verbal authorization. You ask for the material, and then get off that call, and we're all done.
Amen. Ain't it easy?
Yep.
So, follow-up question from what Scott said. So, from the same listener, what is the best way to utilize a TC or a transaction coordinator? You talked about, or have you seen ways that they can be effectively utilized? I guess to your point, to your earlier point, is it that they're just trying to use them for too much?
I don't know. I think, this is going to sound really demeaning, and I don't mean it to be that way, but a lot of investors, they just want to get out and start making money. They take their courses to what it might be. They have enough information to be dangerous, and they go. And I know with these transactional coordinators that are out there, they do the same thing. They just get involved in it. They're told to do a few things. They start doing it. But they don't really have the knowledge base to understand all the moving parts that are out there. There's a time and place, I think, to utilize them all. Dealing with sellers direct, dealing with back-end buyers direct, dealing with a loan processor, maybe with the closing agent and those kind of items. But sometimes they want to get out there and do too much, which creates some problems. And I know this will never happen where you have really good, knowledgeable investors and TCs. It's just the nature of the business that it's never going to be that way. It has never been that way. And there's that kind of like that 90-10 rule you see out there. And as I said earlier, with these TCs, use them for what you need for the I don't want to call it, well, let's just call it what it is, the grunt work, communicating with sellers, buyers, the closing agent, maybe helping with the insurance, all the little things you got to go through and take care of and get done. And on things that need a little bit higher level participation in, go do it yourself. Just don't let somebody else do it for you.
Well, let me jump in. What you said gave me a thought. It's the same as an assistant. You don't trust them inherently. You train them. So if you want to tell your TC, all right, I need this, and this done, and here's how you're going to do it on each and every transaction. So you line them out. That's that's probably the best way to utilize them. I've never used one, but I would think if you just trust them implicitly with them doing what you tell them to do versus show them to do, you're probably going to be in trouble.
Well, these
Yeah,
investors,
that's to business, right? You need to have systems in place. You need to have a process, a workflow, what they can do, what they need to ask you for approval in advance. What are the common issues that can arise? How those common issues need to be dealt with. And you need to not just have training on paper, but man, take the time to create the videos that say, here's what you do, here's why you do it this way, and here's why you come to me with these questions if this arises. And you consistently and routinely engage in training because it's your business. You don't just do it the one time.
Natalia, you still on Venus? I wish that could be the case so much. I unfortunately see so often investors are just lazy.
Well, I want
That
to
sounds
better
awesome.
investors.
I know that sounds awesome to have them do those kind of things. I have got so many videos out there online on our various websites to help them step-by-step processes, do this, do that, walk through these things. Do you think they do it? No.
I think the successful ones do. And that's the difference, right? Do you want to
Yeah,
be a failure and be in the red, or do you want to
Yep.
actually be successful?
Yeah. It's that 90-10 thing again, I think, out there along the way.
Yeah. Well, that's all of our questions, everybody. And we got a lot of them. And that was a good discussion, but I don't want to keep you folks any longer than they have to be because I know you're all busy. So with that, why don't we call it and get together again and answer more questions here in a week. Thanks for everybody for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thanks
guys.
for having us.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
We'll
you.
see